better. Good evening. Quite a bit has happened in the last day or two in regards to sport. Obviously, Frank Lampard has been sacked by Everton, so Everton are now without a manager. Um, Kind of surprised they've acted when they have, considering that the transfer window's got a further week or so still left, and therefore whoever comes in is going to have a very very limited time with the squad that they have in order to turn things round. So that's very very interesting. Marco Bielsa is favourite. Marcelo Bielsa, sorry, is favourite to take over. Goodison, although there are other managers in the frame for the Toffees' top job. The NRL CBA negotiations seem to have hit a brick wall, and the NRL players are looking very likely at this point to go on strike. Now, yes, there has been a salary cap increase. It has been kind of arbitrary. It hasn't been really communicated very well to the player base. The CBA was meant to be renegotiated before the World Cup kicked off in October, so this is dragged on now for best part of 4 months. Whilst the World Cup was in progress, several high-profile players who were either at the tournament or were members of the Rugby League Players Association have released statements stating that they are frustrated with the process that they are going through with the NRL as things currently stand, and that from various points of view, it depends on the player. They're either fighting for the rights for former players in regards to their healthcare program they have in place for post-playing medical care assistance, base league minimum salary for either young emerging players or those players who are on lesser contracts, and for the women's game, support for the women's game of the three major areas of which there are concerns. Basically, the post-playing medical retirement fund. So there's two different things. This is a medical welfare fund. When you retire, you have 12 months to get all your surgeries. So, and in Andrew Fafita's case, he's got about 12 to 14 surgeries he requires. That's not easily done over here. That's a lot of stress to put through the body in a very short space of time, because your body obviously has to heal, obviously, and devote a lot of its energy to healing. That's a lot of surgeries. Um, so they want to extend that or have better provision for which to look after players near the end of their careers, injured players, and retired players. In regards to the league minimum salary, they want to increase that. With the salary cap going up, that is a very justifiable grievance. I can see why a massive increase may not be in the offing, but the final one is the women's game. The women want to have their own CBA, the NRLW, and more job security, which is again totally reasonable considering that the NRL has signed up to support the women's game anyway as part of the contracts and agreements since the women's game had the NRLW brought in 2018. So over the last 5 years, the NRL has committed to growing the women's game. Now there are some other issues as well. There's always an issue with a CBA negotiation, like length of term of a CBA and various things. Look, in regards to like things like early onset dementia and CTE, obviously the players sign up knowing that obviously it is a contact sport, it's a dangerous contact sport. So there is some personal responsibility there. I think the responsibility with that relies on, again, I think rugby league is one of the leading sports in regards to concussion protocols. I think they've got some of them wrong. I think there's more to learn. They're willing to look at the science in that regard. They're not as knee jerk. They are evolving, mandatory stand down periods. But then that links back into the player welfare fund and the medical fund. So the player welfare fund, there's agreements being made that the NRL will continue to top that up. It should be around 30 to 40 million Australian dollars. Obviously, where the league is at, a lot has happened over the last 3 years, or just just shy of 3 years since the pandemic shut down global sport 3 years ago. This time 3 years ago, the warning signs were there that there was going to be a massive global shutdown. We've gone through a hell of a lot over the last 3 years, the last 36 months or so. Um, the NRL itself as a league has gone through a lot of changes, a lot of changes, and the there's been rule changes. The NRL has been very, very flexible, was adapting on the fly to scheduling conflicts. They're going to have their own issues this year, this season, with the Women's Football World Cup taking place in Australia and New Zealand. Stadium availability is going to become a bit of an issue. In regards to head injuries and just injuries in general and mandatory stand down periods and player welfare concerns when you're actually playing, I think they're doing well. I think they could do more. I think they need to be a little bit more proactive, and some of their protocols I think could be strengthened. Um, and if those are put in place, then that mitigates any potential lawsuits. I think a lot of the litigation claims are coming from players that have retired a decade plus ago, and that's again in regard. And then you look at the medical fund for where things currently stand with their medical arrangements. I will be doing a video on this tomorrow. As I've got 3 days off work, I will be doing a lot of content on the channel. But yeah, there are things that could be put in place. There's been a lot of statements from the clubs and the player base. I think the clubs are actually in support of their players because the clubs weren't really sure what the salary cap was going to be either, so they couldn't. Um, um, in response to the fact there wasn't a salary cap, they can't sign players, they can't negotiate contracts with players coming off contract. It makes it hard for the clubs to budget their books going forward for the next calendar year or two. So the clubs are a bit frustrated with the salary cap situation. Now, how the salary cap will be structured and what rules they put in place for maximum contract values and maximum terms of contracts, that again is something that again clubs would want to figure out as well. Um, just the team in Melbourne, the Melbourne Storm. New Zealand's a rugby both code mad country, and Auckland is rugby league central in New Zealand. So the fact that New Zealand Warriors were originally called the Auckland Warriors is a traditional location in New Zealand. Outside of New South Wales and Queensland, it is literally just the Melbourne Storm. There are no teams further west as things currently stand, although there is a debate of who and where the 18th team should be, although the North Sydney Bears appear to be favourite at this time for a re-entry into the first grade arena where they were in the 90s last, the old North Sydney Bears. Um, in regards to discussing delayed effects or early onset dementia or brain injuries, just injuries in general, um, I think the protocols need to be strengthened in regards to mandatory stand down periods, because that can prolong a player's career. We've seen several high profile players retire young because of head knocks or just injury in general, but head knocks is the one. Boyd Cordner and Jake Friend for the Sydney Roosters, for example, Caelan Pong at the Newcastle Knights. He's had a lot of concussions, so how will that impact his career considering he's one of the highest paid players, if not the highest paid player in the game? He's on big money for Australian sporting standards. You've got Ryan Pappenhausen's had some, and James Tedesco as well have had some fair whacks to the old noggin. So the concussion aspect, and you can get concussed without getting knocked out, and you can be knocked out and not concussed, but blows to the head, it's not a good thing. Um, it's not generally good for your health. In so that again plays into it. I think another reason why the player base is showing their muscle is they weren't overly consulted about a lot of the rule changes that have taken place over the last 3 years. Yes, they were proactive and pragmatic rule changes by the NRL, but I think there was a not the strongest consultation period with the player base and the clubs. I think the NRL acted a little bit more abruptly than they were feeling in regards to that. I think there's still some lingering aftermath of the player bubbles in Queensland when the NRL had to relocate at short notice, and there were some complaints from the player base about how that was handled and certain aspects of supporting players and their families. So there'll be some grumbling there from some. Not all the players are united on this. Now, this is where I think the players are more united than they have ever been with the with the Rugby League Players Association. But some players are saying they want the minimum, length of contract and minimum contract values raised. That's their key concern because they're normally the younger players. Uh, More senior players are obviously one eye out on retirement. They might be retiring in the next couple of years. They want better provisions post playing with the pension fund and the medical fund. There may be players who, or female players, the NRLW, they want to have more certainty. And there's some other bits and pieces. My 3,000 subscribers forfeit. We got to get to the 2,000 subscriber forfeit yet, and that's getting hold of a Burnley shirt to add to the collection, which will be done against my free will. But there you go. My 3,000 subscribers, I haven't even thought about forfeits. I think we might stop doing the forfeits after so many milestones. But the next one's the Burnley shirt, and then after that, I don't know. I'm not thinking that far ahead at this point. I'm thinking each day that it comes with the channel and work. Interesting though it may be, and we may have a bit of a laugh about it. On a more serious note, on a non-sporting note, I'm taking each day as it comes with work and the channel and personal stuff. It's been a tough couple of weeks my end, so I'm not really thinking about fun forfeits to do. Yeah, Southampton club under pressure in the relegation zone, or in the relegation fight. Newcastle obviously wanting to be taken seriously at the top end of the table. How the tides have turned in that little fixture, considering where the clubs were at not so long ago with Ralph Hoosenhardt signing a 5-year contract extension and Southampton and Newcastle, going through the managers and not knowing who was going to be owning the club and whether the sale take place and threatened with relegation and the fans. It's completely turned in the space of 2-3 years, something like that. The tables have massively turned, which is surprising. Although Southampton as a club are very well run, Newcastle until recently obviously have had Mike Ashley in charge. So let that sink in regards to the state of play at both clubs. One club's got positive vibes right now, and one club is staring down the barrel of the championship. Um, have you done history of Southampton? Yes, yes, I've done Southampton, Portsmouth, and Bournemouth. And the only other South Coast club that I've got to do, who are in the professional top 5 divisions at the moment, is Brighton Hove Albion. Um, Brighton Hove Albion are the next club on the south coast that I've got to do a video on at some point. I've done a lot of the other clubs. I think in the Football League we've got mostly League One and League Two. Wasn't planning on doing a club history video at this time. There are a few ongoing issues I think in sport that. Yes, yeah. Again, the European ban. I've said this before. Did impact several clubs quite severely, which then had an impact on their ability to retain players, sign players, as in attract players to the club, attract players to stay, be an attractive location. And there were some very very good sides who weren't called Liverpool. Um, in Nottingham Forest and Everton in English football in the 80s that could have actually challenged them more had Hazel and the European ban not been a thing. Um, and there is a minority of Liverpool fans who have that chip on their shoulder, and there you go. There's the reason for that. Li- Outside the fan base, Liverpool isn't a well-liked club, and they don't understand why. A lot of the younger fans, but there's a lot of reasons for that, and it's some of the reasoning's a bit stupid. But unfortunately, there's a proportion of the football fan base that drags the sport down into the gutter quite severely. So it is what it is. But no, it's some interesting questions there. I mean, in regards to any forfeits, at the moment I'm not thinking about forfeits really. Club history of some current non-league sides: Hereford, Chester, Rushden Diamonds, Kidderminster, Harriers, Boston United would be quite a good one to do because the end of their time in the football league was about 20 odd years ago, and there was some very interesting accounting, some financial irregularities, and some points deductions at Boston United. So that would be a very, very interesting club to look at. Rushden and Diamonds, the rise and fall will be quite interesting. One of my work colleagues has asked me to look at the history of Altrincham in regards to their non-league. You know, when they were trying to get into the football league before promotion relegation was brought in to replace the football league. You know, you vote for your membership, you vote a membership application. Um, but there's a couple there. Boston United and Rushden and Diamonds are very, very interesting to look at. I would have thought. But they're the two clubs that I'm most interested in looking at why they ended up where they are. Um, and Boston United is the really interesting one with how they were fiddling their financials in the early 2000s, which ultimately led to them having points deductions and being bad on the field as well didn't help, and then ended up getting relegated out the football league and haven't been back. Um, the fact that they're still a going concern is just amazes me. But Boston United is one of those clubs that I think, looking at the current Juventus situation, it there is. Oh, Matt Tizier. I think staying at Southampton when Southampton were having their struggles in the Premier League, early Premier League era, hampered his England chances. I think unfairly so. And I think there is an obsession with selecting players from fashionable clubs, um, basically clubs in the top six, top eight. I think that's where I think Southgate has bucked the trend a little bit, but I think it's a thing. Harbour FC got relegated from the Football League because Jimmy Glass scored the winner in the goal in the other. Yeah, I remember that. And again, you could say, oh, but they got relegated because a rival club. Yeah, it's called not being good enough. Is the simple answer. You've got to win your games, not drop too many points too often. Um, don't lose too many games, that kind of thing. If you're not winning enough, or if you're not going to win, get picking up enough points. If your home record's not good enough, it's the thing. At the time, the only big club was made. That's not true. That's not necessarily the case. They were the most consistently successful club at the time, and the decade before it was Liverpool. But there were still some good players playing at other clubs that were getting selected for England. Um, well, you've also got to put in the personal considerations of family considerations and relocation. People tend to think, it's people tend to forget players have families and relocating, your whole family, buying new property, putting your kids in brand new schools, um, leaving a community where you may have lived for your entire life. Like in Letizier's case, yes, he was born in the Channel Islands, but he'd spent his entire adult life in Hampshire. That 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 can be quite daunting for a lot of people. It can be off-putting for a lot of people. And then when it comes to like transfers, you can have a no on your preferred list of clubs. You could put down, "I'm not moving there." Um, Southampton have always been a pretty solid um, solid sized team. Um, it's a one club town, Southampton. It's a one sport town, really. Southampton, one club town, or one club city. So they dominate. They dominate the city. Um, and, but then uh, this debate raises its head all the time when people say, "Well, this player will be a good fit at this side." They will have no movement clauses where they will have no transfer or trade clauses where they'll in their contract saying, "I will not relocate to this part of the country." That's why certain players like Mark Albright, for example, has always played in the Midlands. He started out at Villa, I believe, and now he plays at Leicester. He will have uh, a no transfer clause with a list of clubs or locations. I will say, which will state, I don't want to go there. I'm not willing to relocate to this area. And when you go over to places like Australia or the US, where there's massive distances between locations where teams play, massive distances, that no movement clause um, is very, very important. And in very extenuating circumstances, team management will go to the player and say, "Can you waive your no movement clause to insert teams here or locations here?" If they want to, adjust things or move the player on or players. And generally speaking, that player will be more likely um, either have a bad relationship with the team management by the end, or be close to retirement anyway. When they will be like discussing with their family, right? Let's you know um, move on um, from sport and permanently settle themselves and not have to worry about moving. Um, yeah, Southampton have struggled with their finances in more recent times. That is true. They weren't well run for a while, um, and there's a whole host of reasons for that. Um, Obviously, they used to play at the Dell. Now they've got St Mary's, and that cost them a fair bit of money to build St Mary's and replace the Dell. Um, oh, it's playing up. And a lot of clubs that have either redeveloped or built new stadiums have had money issues at various points. I think the most famous one has got to be Coventry, Coventry City, and that's had a massive impact on the direction and the fortunes of that club. Um, Clubs that seem to have done their stadium refurbs and rebuilds really well are Arsenal and Brentford. Um, it seems to me. I think Spurs may regret fully rebuilding White Hart Lane in time. Yes, the NFL now takes games there, which helps, and they get some money back for that. They still haven't got naming rights for the stadium. Um, they still haven't won any trophies with the new stadium, and the gap between them and the league rivals is still there. Do you remember when Clive Wood was? That was a yes, yes. He was sporting director. And that actually happens where you have sporting directors who have been involved in sport in general. The Buffalo Sabres former head coach in ice hockey was also had the same role of performance director that Sir Clive Woodward had. Southampton are a club that like thinking outside the box at times, and it's not the first time that they've got a director of sport or a sporting director from another sport. I forget the ice hockey coach's name. He was recently, not that long ago, sacked by Buffalo a year or two ago. But that is more common than you might think. Um, and yeah, but Sir Clive Woodward was it was a couple. It was a few years after he had finished with rugby union as a head coach. Um, he went in as a performance sporting director, I believe, and it's not necessarily a bad move. Obviously, he had been offered a very good opportunity, um, and you know, he was a very, very successful head coach, admittedly in another sport, but it's irrelevant. Yeah, Ralph Kruger, that's the one. Um, and yeah, I think he was there for a good 2 or 3 years. And I think it was to do with not recruitment, player development, and sport director, like getting. He didn't do a bad job, let's just say that. But I think the owners at the time, the ownership group at the time, and the board at the time were the ones making the decision. I don't think it was a true sporting decision. But Ralph Kruger's been involved, I think, 3 different sports. But the in my opinion, I'm not against thinking outside the box. I think it can benefit an organisation. It can benefit the direction and that a team can go. Thinking outside the box has brought success on more than one occasion for a sporting um, franchise or team or a sporting owner. Um, and if done properly, with due diligence, with the right individual or individuals or structures put in place, it can have great rewards. And look how many coaches think outside the box as well. Brian Clough was one of those who had interest. I wouldn't say he had interesting managerial techniques in the sense of his tactics, but the way he dealt with players as individuals was very interesting. So Alex Ferguson, you could pretty much he's the prototype manager. Arsene Wenger revolutionised the nutrition aspect, the recovery aspect. He modernised a lot of things, and then Ferguson sort of copied suit and evolved alongside him. They were both evolving with each other. Mourinho again, um, with that kind of cult personality with the media, which was quite interesting that other managers hadn't done before. Um, so there are some managers who've had left their mark on the game for different reasons. Um, London Stadium, the London Stadium is technically owned by the Olympic Legacy Corporation or the City of London. It's owned by London. The London Mayor's Office has a say um, in a lot of the facilities like the Copper Box and things like that. So I think any kind of sponsorship deal would have to go through local government. The Mayor's Office in London obviously signed the lease contract with West Ham, and there's been much debate on that. Did West Ham get a very cheap deal? Yes. Does the current administration in London at the Mayor's Office dislike that deal? Yes. Are they trying to undo that deal? They're thinking about it, but if they piss off West Ham enough, West Ham will just go right. We'll build a new stadium and we'll move out, and then you lose a tenant. So the deal that West Ham have got is very favourable to them. Um, and I believe with that particular stadium, as it is, I think it's either part owned by local government or I can't remember if it's fully owned. I think there is the Legacy Corporation, which is basically government ownership. Um, Makes it interesting when it comes to sponsorship. The rebuild of White Hart Lane, or what I call White Hart Lane, um, how they haven't got a main sponsor for that, even if they just said it's White Hart Lane, is beyond me. The old White Hart Lane had sponsorship rights. They just made sure it was called White Hart Lane, and whoever the team sponsor was at the time got the main sponsorship rights. So I'm very, very surprised that Daniel Levy, being the businessman that he is, hasn't struck up a commercial arrangement for sponsorship rights for their rebuilt stadium, because that's another income revenue stream that they're missing out on. And uh, it's an interest. I mean, what else can I say? There's some very good players that have played for Spurs, but I have some concerns about the club. Frustrates me. Best way to describe it. Spurs are a club that frustrates me intensely. They should be more successful than they have been historically and in recent times. And I think a lot of the problems lie with the ownership in regards to um, the lack of success. That's it. Well, Vodafone is an interesting because Vodafone's had a lot of sponsorship arrangements with a lot of sports globally, not just here in the UK. And they've been burned before with sponsorship deals with teams. They've sponsored so many. Motorsport's a big one. Vodafone, if you notice, Vodafone have sponsored a lot of motorsport teams, including McLaren. They sponsored rugby league in Australia and New Zealand, but then their franchise they pay for the rights for the Vodafone logo and name under license those companies, but the Vodafone spread their brand. Vodafone Rugby Union, Rugby League, Motorsport. I can't remember Vodafone sponsoring a football team. Um, why they would have pulled out of that deal is anyone's guess. I couldn't tell you. I wasn't even aware they were in for a sponsorship deal or in negotiations with the Hammers. But again, that's nothing. We find out about these things in time. Um, but Vodafone used to sponsor the Newbury Rugby Union side because their head office and headquarters is in Newbury, and the Newbury Rugby Club is literally round the corner from um, from it. Yeah, but that's Vodafone Turkey. That's not Vodafone UK. Vodafone UK is the parent company that gives out the franchising naming rights or lease rights for networks under their Vodafone brand. But other than a stadium sponsor, can't think of them being a shirt sponsor for a football club. Rugby, yes. Motorsport, yes. Rugby league, yes. Other sports, not so much. But they're very, very, very good in the sports and their branding in sports. Well, they normally are the title sponsor of a sports team. If they're sponsoring someone, they are the main sponsor. Um, Plastered all over. They've done the V8 supercars. They've done F1. They've done rugby union, rugby league. They're generally like they're the New Zealand Warriors primary sponsor. They're one of the East African uh, uh, United Rugby Championship sides. I think they did Ireland for a bit, if I'm not mistaken. They do. They sponsor someone else high profile in rugby union, so they're very visible with their sports sponsorship when with the teams that they choose, and the sports they choose to put their money behind for sponsorship reasons. Um, in regards to sponsorship rules, obviously, um, in France, alcohol sponsorship is banned. Obviously, now we have the ban on tobacco sponsorship, um, and gambling is another one. The gambling sponsorship. I will link that into the current situation in snooker, where we have is it 10 or 12 players under investigation now for match fixing and spot fixing, which has got to be the biggest scandal that sport has ever faced. Um, and very damaging for snooker, the trust in the sport, the integrity of the sport. Um, and I remember before the gambling sponsorship was big in snooker, and now it's become massive. And get the betting industry or the gambling industry is one of the few industries in recent years to be regularly profitable. Um, a lot of other industries have either had reduced profits or are struggling to get by, like hospitality and travel and tourism, and companies linked to manufacturing. The betting industry, the gambling industry has seen record profits. Record. There's 10. I mean, I know there was like I think a previous scandal involved three or four, including a Welsh player. Um, Obviously, we've had Stephen Lee. He got banned, and Stuart Bingham. Except Bingham's offences was slightly different, although they still were in breach of the sports code on gambling and sports rules. But he pled guilty, and he had a gambling addiction, but he dealt with his problems very openly and with a lot of dignity. My video on Stuart Bingham is still on the channel, and I quite rightly do criticise him for being a wally and not seeking the professional support that is there. But in Stephen Lee's case, he's never returned to the sport. Um, I think his ban's still ongoing, and he hasn't even appealed it. So it just tells you to show you the fact that there is such a high number. I think the numbers will grow. I think there's more players will get implicated, um, and that's quite damaging. And we've discussed the current situation with the snooker and the allegations, because they are allegations, they haven't been proven yet. No one's received a ban as of yet. Um, no one's had a backdated suspension. Um, the fact that, yeah, the amount of players in one go, it's stunning, quite frankly, stunning and very, very troubling. Um, but as I say, uh, the explosion of popularity in the sport, the growth of the sport with more players on the professional ranks now, is interesting. Yeah, Stephen Lee. I mean, I can't believe it's nearly been 10 years. So he's got a year and a half to go or thereabouts, pretty much. If he comes back to play, I don't know how other players will feel about him returning. Um, and that will be very, very interesting how other players will respond to that, considering some of the statements that some high-profile players have made, like Sean Murphy, for example, in recent weeks with these allegations and suspensions, pending investigation, and what's been coming out in recent days and weeks, how they feel about if these players are found to have done what they've done. Um, and some players are very, very not want to play against them ever again. They should be banned for life. Other players say, well, we have to look at the reasons why they did what they did. And do they accept any blame? Were they pressured? That kind of stuff. The background to it. So if Stephen Lee decides to return to the sport, that would be very, very interesting. And how that will go down with the player base, because there'll be players who go, I refuse to play against them. What was if they get drawn in the same tournament, for example? Um, that poses a challenge to tournament organisers. What is also interesting is how the Hearns, who are the money men behind the sport, at the promoters of it, have been remarkably silent. Remarkably silent. Um, the governing body's been quite vocal about the situation and released a lot of statements in regards to these are the players under investigation. This is when we're looking at the time frame of when alleged offences took place. But not a single statement or press release from Barry or Eddie Hearn, which I find verging on tantamount to criminal. Um, Not a single press release statement. question answer session, anything. Um, so I find that pretty damning. I've always made my views on Barry and Eddie Hearn quite clear on the channel. So I doubt that I will, if I ever become big enough, I'd ever interview one of them, um, uh, or, or or cross paths with them either. I would prefer not to. The irony is, let's say this channel kicks off and explodes, and you get invited to one of those fancy dinners or something. They're not the type of people I would like to have a conversation with, because there'll be words coming out of my mouth that may be deemed offensive to those of a sensitive persuasion. I would not be holding my tongue in regards to how I feel in regards to the sports that they are actively involved in, and the corruption allegations that surround every single sport they are actively involved in, that they make money off. Um, I feel that they have definitely cheapened the sports that they're involved in, and the allegations of corruption surrounding the sports they're involved in seem to have increased with their involvement. They seem to chase pure profit over integrity, and some of their business arrangements, and how they conduct themselves, leaves a lot to be desired, in personal opinion. Um, in regards to Stephen Lee, and when and if and when he returns, I don't think he personally does. But if he does return to the sport, how other players would feel would go a long way into seeing if that return would be a success and beneficial to him and the sport. It could be one of them that it just doesn't happen. Um, but we've seen, in other sports, where an individual has returned from a ban, and it's like business as normal. Um, and I think it doesn't matter what the ban's for. An individual, a player, or an athlete has returned from a lengthy suspension for cheating, or an off-field incident, a drugs ban for doping, that kind of thing. Um, there could have been legal issues that they've had, which have ultimately led to them not being allowed to compete. They return, and it seems like business as normal, and therefore, in my opinion, that is tantamount to acknowledging that their behaviour is basically okay. It's not a problem, um, and it doesn't matter what the sport is. It doesn't matter what the offence is. We have, as I say, seen um, you know athletes or participants get a ban, come back from ban, business as normal. Other cases we've seen, um, like Lance Armstrong, for example, life bans, and they've not been welcomed back. Make of that what you will. Um, and that is very, very interesting. Um, but in other cases, there's been a ban handed down, a punishment, and the individual has been allowed back into the sport, and it doesn't appear that the attitudes are negative towards that individual, and he or she is allowed to take the field, or compete, um, without opponents refusing to play against them, even though there's been statements to the contrary. So that then raises questions about the sport's integrity and culture. They're trying to stamp out a certain type of behaviour or action, and that's been argued before, uh, and to great length, in great detail, um, and we can debate the pros and cons of those arguments. It's like discussing, like, Luis Suarez and how many bans he had for foul play on the field. Um, the situation with like Eric Cantona's kung fu kick and the debate that created about um, you know keeping fans and players sort of separated, and then it raised questions about those fans who've got banning orders, questions about those fans who've got banning orders, stadium security, a whole range of things came out of the Eric Cantona situation. Um, and then we've seen obviously the Lance Armstrong situation where he basically has been banned from all forms of sport for life, pretty much, um, because of the systematic nature of his cheating, which then impacted some teammates and rivals, and how they also received um, bans at various points in their careers or create controversy. Then we look at track and field athletics, and there are some athletes in track and field athletics who have been banned multiple times. And then we look at some instances in rugby league with Bronson Sherry, for example, Shandor Earl, and Michael Jennings. Michael Jennings basically banned himself into retirement. Shandor Earl basically destroyed his career, but was thrown under the bus. And Bronson Sherry hasn't shown enough remorse, in my opinion, um, for me as a fan to go, okay, I forgive this young individual for, systematic cheating of the system. But then we look at how the peptide scandal was dealt with in Australia, and we work out it was a mishmash of really bad sports administration, weak guidance from ASADA. The World Anti-Doping Agency didn't do a good job either, and then the aftermath of it, a lot of players via their players associations in the AFL and NRL, quite rightly, were quite frustrated and angry with how they were dealt with. And then rival players and other teams were like, well, how are these guys getting such short suspensions? Then it raised the integrity of the sports in question, rugby league and Aussie rules. And then it raised other questions about biosecurity and then what's actually in substances, and player welfare was raised. But the big one was sporting culture. And have we gone too far with getting the bulking up of athletes, win at all costs mentality, and a whole range of other issues at play that in recent years have been brought into question? We're having a bigger debate about athlete welfare, the win at all costs policy, the pros and cons of that, especially here in the UK. I don't know, what issues are like in other parts of the world. What we've seen is the amount of sporting scandals with governing bodies, and especially with the Olympic IOC programs um, in North America and here in regards to athlete welfare on a variety of issues. We've seen government investigations, we've seen trials, convictions, the whole range of everything in between. What's currently happening at the Welsh Rugby Union in regards to harassment claims and bullying and the complaints process. That's been around the culture at the Welsh Rugby Union. A rugby union, by the way, that received government money during the pandemic, so taxpayers have bailed out this institution. And there are calls for the head of the Welsh Union to resign, considering that they've just sacked their head coach and replaced him with the former head coach, who's the reason why the sacked head coach was hired in the first place. So there's definitely a lot of pressure on Warren Gatland as the incoming coach to deal with a lot of questions that have got nothing to do with his role within the organisation as a head coach. That's the admin side of things and the culture, but then linking. We've seen it with the Football Association. We've seen it with the former Crawley Town manager Yems getting an 18-month suspension for racism. which I haven't covered on the channel, even though I possibly should have. Um, Although, to be fair, he's a manager in his 60s. He's basically any club that signs him up as manager. You'll have to think about their internal culture, um, and how much of a PR design. Basically, certain suspensions ban you for life. I'm trying to think. There was a player. I'm trying to think on the sport now. There was a player, and no one wanted to sign him. There was a Boston Bruins youngster who had been drafted. There were allegations against him for racism and disability comments this off season, and he was given his entry level contract. And then things hit the fan quite quickly, and he's not playing for the Boston Bruins, even though he was given his entry level contract, and the Boston Bruins have to pay him his money. Then there was the Jake Buchanan Vancouver Canucks. What's come out about him? And he's basically retired himself from the sport by that Slava Vayanov, who played for the LA Kings Stanley Cup winning sides. He's basically retired himself from the sport for domestic violence, um, which was proven, even though he's completed his rehabilitation under the court-ordered rehabilitation. Still hasn't played for the best part of a decade. The Kings have to keep paying him, or were paying him, for the length of his contract. So there's been, some instances where an individual hasn't returned to their sport of choice because of their actions. It's like Ron Atkinson. When was the last time you heard Ron Atkinson on the TV or on the radio? So let that sink in. There are certain individuals who have um, basically retired themselves from sport for their actions, either on or off the field. It doesn't matter. And they were deemed as so severe in the sense that no one wants to touch them with a barge pole because it damages their, standing. It becomes so controversial. Oh, let's not get involved with this individual because it'd be damaging for our brand, how we're trying to sell ourselves. Good evening, Tommy. How are you doing? Bit of a later one tonight, but why not? Why not, indeed? Um, I was planning to do it a bit earlier this evening, but I fell asleep. The answer to that one. I've had a bit of a tough time at work lately. Um, hasn't been a happy time at work, um, and the weather's been horrible, cold. It's been foggy. It's been icy, and then obviously before the cold snap, we've had a month's worth of like a month of consistent rain, so everything's flooded and frozen. So it's been a pretty dreary time lately. Um, and we've had a couple of cold spells, and then we've had just a prolonged spell of rain, and now another cold spell. So, how is North Wales? How is North Wales? Good, thanks. Glad I managed to catch you. Missed the last few shows. Hope things get better. We'll see what happens. I've got a few days off work, so I've got a 5-day weekend. So I've got 5 days to focus on me and just relax and do my housework, look after myself. Really, it's cold here as well. I mean, it's well below freezing. A lot of ice. Lost control of the car the other day. Yeah, getting to and I mean, our work depot, all our vehicles, all our work vehicles were frozen earlier this week. Yesterday it was -7 in the town centre where I work, and in the sticks where I'm 2-3 miles south of the town centre. I'm in a bit more of a rural location. It's been very, very cold, which has obviously led to a lot of postponed sporting fixtures, including, let's say, Accrington Stanley versus Boreham Wood, which has been played right now in the FA Cup third round. The replay has been delayed by a week due to a frozen pitch or a flooded pitch the week before. Um, so that's a very sharp turnaround for both those clubs. Fixture congestion. It even impacts the lower leagues. Um, I don't know what's happened to the Romanian rugby team. I know there's been a lot of issues with the Romanian rugby union and their setup to do with the last two World Cups and the qualification process. I haven't really heard any further news, although I haven't really been paying attention to the rugby union news really. The Six Nations is around the corner, but it hasn't. Six Nations hasn't started yet. But it is what it is there. Yes, there's going to be a lot of fixture congestion. A lot of fixture congestion with English football and just European football in general. There's been so many postponements um, across Europe this winter at various times. That'll be interesting for Accrington Stanley going into the fourth round this weekend against Leeds, I believe, and they're the home side, so they haven't got very long to prepare themselves for the visit to Leeds, which will be very interesting. Yep, they're the home side. They've got one. I've got to do a video on Accrington Stanley and their history because they've got one of the smallest grounds um, in the football league, if not the smallest, and also the smallest budget, I believe, as well. Um, but yes, there's going to be a lot of fixture pile-ups, very similar to the COVID period, as I call it, in 2020 and 2021. Those seasons that were heavily impacted, where they just had so many games got postponed. Dover Athletic couldn't finish one of the seasons, I believe, because they just couldn't. And then I think it was the 2020-2021 season. The League One, League Two, and the National League and below just couldn't complete. And Dover Athletic couldn't complete the season. And it cost Torquay the National League title or something because the fixture pile up became so ridiculous that they just ran out of steam and Dover couldn't resume play and there were players going down and testing positive in the protocols and all that. Who will win the FA Cup? I think it'll be a surprising one this year. I think it will be a surprising one that we're not expecting. A team like Leeds could be the team that does it. There'll be some more shocks to come in the fourth and fifth round. Um, but I think a team like Leeds, with how they play and how they approach the game in an attacking sense, could be the side to do it. What sports international? I think the Women's World Cup, is looking very interesting this summer for us. Winter, obviously, in the Southern Hemisphere. And because it's been played in the Southern Hemisphere winter, that could be very interesting for how that impacts the players. Obviously, the recent Euros and recent both men's and women's were played in obviously our summer, very hot temperatures. The Qatar World Cup wasn't as hot as expected. And flip that, it'll be interesting to see how the weather conditions impact Women's World Cup. The Rugby World Cup in France is going to be interesting. Well, we're seeing so many law changes and rule changes in rugby union. I have some concerns about the future of that sport going forward. I think England's women will do quite well, yes. They've got the right structures in place. Their style suits the players they have available to them. And they'll be full of confidence, I think, after the summer's performance last year. Full of confidence. I really honestly believe that. Just with how they're playing at the moment and their ability just to score goals at women's level. I think the US and Japan will be the two toughest tests of the non-European nations that they probably will come up against later on in the tournament, should they progress to the semi-finals or the final. Um, but I think they've come a long way since the last World Cup in 2019. I think where the team are at now to where they were under Phil Neville is completely different. And it does show that occasionally, with English national sides, a foreign coach can pay off. I I understand in the men's game we've tried the foreign experiment; it didn't work, and it had lasting consequences of a negative nature that we're still working through, feeling through. Um, I also understand that the Scots have tried it as well with Bertie Vogts, and that didn't work north of the border. And then the Northern Ireland and the Republic and Wales have always gone for homegrown coaching talent. In regards to, okay, Mick McCarthy's obviously second generation Irish immigrant, but you get the point. Portsmouth, Cardiff. I think Cardiff making the final, yes, was the shock because they're the non-Premier League side. I think yes. Fulham, good shout. Brighton, good shout as well. England are not looking very good for the Netball World Cup. They are winless in the quad series. Oh look, you're allowed to have a down tournament every now and then. Um, you can only win every. You can't win every single tournament um, you enter. England, not. I take Thomas Tuchel at England, but honestly, a bad game and the English media will absolutely tear him up. Sven, I think Sven until the end. I think the 2006 World Cup with Sven obviously is where it went wrong, but actually, to be fair, Sven didn't do too bad. Um, personally. Um, do I think Germany will bounce back? Is it on Hansi Flick? Is it on the German FA? Is it on the German development structures? Is there a Bundesliga problem, which I've argued in a video? Do I think they'll bounce back? Uh, the way that the Hansi Flick does have to bear some of the responsibility, but so do the players. But it's been three major tournaments in a row where Germany haven't played well. Two World Cups, they failed to get out of the group, and the Euros, they were just not great. Um, is that a legacy of Jurgi Löw being there for too long? Is that a legacy of the structures that the German FA have put in place? But then Italy are the same, although Italy have won a major tournament in the last 2 years. So Italy and Germany I'm really surprised with. Spain, ironically, I think are back to the Spain of old, where they promise much and deliver little. Um, we're going to have to see what happens. But I think the US women's soccer team will do well at the World Cup after the scandal of the NWSL. Um, I think there's a lot of politics around the women's game in the US that I think the last World Cup it dogged them, and they were I think the least popular nation to win win a World Cup. I think everyone else wanted Japan to shock them again, or England to do it. They weren't particularly well liked um, by everyone else. Um, we'll see how much the domestic issues the game has will impact them. England had such a great chance to win the last two World Cups. Yeah, a lot of countries are having downswings at the moment. It may be a curse for winning four World Cups if we did the same thing what Germany did before. Brazil haven't done well. Actually, Brazil have underachieved as well since 2002, so they've won five. Where's my phone? How is it going? It's all right, up and down, Harry. I like horse racing to a certain extent. I watch it less than what I used to. I used to work at Ascot Racecourse, so I have been actually. I have worked in the horse racing industry for a while, or well, a brief period, not for long. Um, I watch it less than what I used to. I don't dislike the sport. I prefer jump racing to flat racing because the jump horses are actually treated a lot better than the flat racing horses. Um, just from personal views on it. Um, so there is that. It's just I don't like flat racing. Just don't like it. Never have. Um, Never have. I prefer the jump racing because the horses are much better treated and they're raced less as well, so they have more recovery time in between race meets. Um, I don't really like American women's sports either. To be fair, I do agree on that. They are very unpleasant athletes, Americans, especially the women athletes. They seem to come across with a massive chip on their shoulder and not particularly likable individuals for a lot of them. Yes, the women's basketball player was released in exchange for the Merchants of Death. Yes. Um, who's like in the Oh God, Italy or Spain? I think it'll be neither side will win the next international trophy. Um, how many people would watch horse racing without betting? A lot less. Well, actually, when I was a kid, I used to really like and enjoy watching horse racing because I was more sportsman as a kid, ironically, than I am now. I've become a bit more selective in the sports I watch now. I do bet, but I'm at the point where I can quite happily watch a big race. I don't gamble anymore on the horses. I used to I occasionally buy a Euro Millions lottery ticket and a scratch card maybe once a month on payday. So Friday I will be buying my Euro Millions ticket and a scratch card, and that's it. That's my gambling done for the next month or two. But no, horse racing, I've stopped betting now the Grand National for the last 5 years. Haven't had a bet on the Grand National. I had a good winning streak on the Grand National as well, where I always won money. I think there's only 2 Grand Nationals I haven't picked to win a Royal Place horse since the age of 10. I used to pick my horses for my mum. Um, Generally have zero interest in horse racing. It wasn't for betting, and I don't think many people would care. That's an interesting one. It's either or. I remember when people used to bet on greyhound racing's died a death, and so speedway because the upkeep of the facilities are too much. Um, can't wait for payday on Friday. I feel like ages because yeah, Christmas was horrible. I'm into my last £80 on my overdraft at this point. So yeah, I've got a £900 overdraft, so I'm basically a grand in debt to the bank, which is why I want this channel to work and pay money so I have a secondary income. Um, I know people who own greyhounds who race, so um, who likes Christmas? Not me. I know I do. I get my Christmas jersey out, my ice hockey jersey out, which is really hideous, ugly thing. It's so ugly, but it's so lovely. But I don't like Christmas. I have a lottery ticket on every week, not so much to win, more to support Great Britain athletes. Yeah, but as I was talking about sports funding and what we now know, following various internal reviews by various sports bodies and the win at all cost mentality and where that money goes and funding cuts and who gets what. Um, yes, I know that sport does have an economic impact for the location. Like a sports team may have a massive economic boost. Um, I'm not a massive fan of Patreon. I'm finding less channels are using Patreon now as much as they were because you don't get all the money. I think when I become eligible for the super chat, that's where a lot of money for the channel will come in. When I get eligible for full monetization, we've got to get the view hours up. That's the one sticking point. It's not the subscriber count now; it's the view hours. Hopefully, we have some really shit weather soon. I can film some weather where it just blizzards or pisses down with hail or rain or something. I can catch that, put it on a short, get loads of views. Um, but if I had a club to play for AC Milan, I just love Italian food. So, and I've been to Milan so many times, and I just love Italian culture. So I'll be more happy um, in Italy. Yes, I was born in Germany, and it wouldn't be Bayern Munich. I would choose to play for. It would be another club. So yes, I'll be having a lot of Italian food tomorrow because it's my dinner. Um, I, 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 I mean, heading to Barcelona for United. Be careful with pickpockets. No offense. Barcelona has a big issue for petty street crime. So if you are in the city centre and not only just going to the stadium but visiting the sites, just watch out for your wallet, your phone, your keys, your passport, your driver's license, that kind of thing. Um, Germany is similar to England. It depends where you go. If you're in southern Germany, it's very alpine. The Rhineland is very industrial. So if you live in any new town or big city, it's just a slightly tidier, cleaner version of London or Birmingham. Rural Germany is just the German equivalent of rural England or rural Scotland, really. Rolling fields, small villages, like little craft breweries and small businesses like little craft markets, things like that. I think you'll find Scandinavia is quite British, like similarities with like little fishing villages and things like that. Netherlands as well, yeah. The Danes and the Dutch are very very similar. Football and darts, yes. The Dutch have really bought into darts. Cycling, they're world class, by the way. And long distance speed skating, they're world champions in that. Big sport in Holland. Big sport. Technically, it's the United Kingdom of the Netherlands, but yes, if you watch the Winter Olympics or World Championships, speed skating and long distance speed skating, when they have the figure of the big long, yeah. Yes, the Dutch like their motorsport as well. And they've got some fantastic motorcyclists and touring car drivers and F1 drivers over their history. Not so good with rallying, though, of that. Um, but what they do forget is they're very good at long track speed skating. They're very good at T20 and a one day international cricket. Ironically, they're not a Test cricket nation. They should be. Um, they're very obviously cycling. They're very good at field hockey, and they're a developing rugby union nation as well. There you go. Yeah, I don't have to get up early in the morning, which is fantastic. I get up at 3 o'clock every morning for work. Um, yeah, the Dutch are very, very interesting. I mean, they very interesting. I've been to rural Italy a lot. The further south you go, the more friendly and relaxed the people are. And when they do surveys of the rudest nations, France, Italy, and ourselves, the UK, come quite high up the list on the metrics of how they work out what is classed as rude or whatever to mostly American tourists, ironically. What I find in France and Italy is once you get outside the north of both countries and into the more regional, provincial areas, they're really friendly and the food's better as well. Um, but no, yeah, people say like obviously Paris and all that are lovely cities. Yeah, the touristy areas. Paris is a shithole. Marseille is vile. And yes, Naples. I've been there. It's not particularly pleasant. Would not recommend. Would not recommend at all as a city to visit. Um, I have never been to the City Isles. No. Um, I think it's more the stereotype. I It's because Americans are used to like customer service where they're always smiling, like forced smile, and they see that as politeness. Um, but I think it depends on what metrics you're using for population happiness, work-life balance, and what is deemed polite and not polite. Um, yeah, no, France is not particularly. I don't particularly like going to France. I like getting out of France. Going through it, lock the doors. I don't particularly like visiting France. I never had school trips I hated. Traveling through Europe with family I hated. I preferred Belgium and Luxembourg and the Rhine area of Germany much more. And then you get to Switzerland and it's just weird. Um, I've been to Croatia, done it, loved it. Yeah, been to Croatia, loved it. Um, Fantastic country, fantastic people. Um, 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 Germany, mixed views. Rural Germany's lovely. Big urban areas, I just can't be bothered with. Um, I've not been to Zagreb. I've been to the Dalmatian coast. I've been to Split and the Dalmatian Islands and the coast. And I wouldn't go to Zagreb. Again, big city, but by Croatian standards, a big city. By you know British standards, it's kind of small. I wouldn't go to a city. I'd always go to more rural, relax, um, relaxed locations. Um, that's the point of a holiday is to relax, not to stress yourself out. Um, my friend who plague doctor, Rob, is popping over tomorrow. So say hi, Rob. We're all saying hello, Rob. Hello, plague doctor. Um, uh, Yeah, Chile is like the South American version of Norway. Look at the coastline. But yes, no, Croatia massively great achievements in sport, be it Olympic sport or just professional team sports, especially obviously football when it comes to international competitions, overachieve. But again, I think a lot of it's to do with the national identity, culture, and a variety of other things. Um, Canada is the best country in the world. The Canadians are voted the most friendly country in the world in every single metric, and they apologise for being friendly. Mad. Um, yeah, Eastern European nations. There's a lot of state-funded um, structures there, hence why they're good at sport. Um, yeah, Canada's voted the friendliest place. And if you don't like ice hockey now, you'll have to. If you're moving to Canada, trust me, start liking ice hockey. It's good for your health. Or CFL, Canadian football. Either become an ice hockey fan or a CFL fan, and you'll make loads of friends and really settle into your community because every community in Canada has an ice rink. Parents went to Naples, Ted not to go. Yeah, Sorrento further down the coast, definitely go. Naples, not so much. Chile qualified for the Hockey World Cup and got absolutely thrashed. The same will happen in the rugby. So what? They've qualified. They've got to progress somehow. Let them progress. Um, you move into Montreal. Okay, you're definitely going to have to like ice hockey to survive in that location because the city is mad for the Canadians. They want the Expos back in baseball as well. So picking up baseball might help you as well. Um, what do I think about moving to? And make sure you buy yourself a Canadians jersey or a Laval Canadians AHL jersey and just get involved with the Canadian. Very what I will say about the Montreal Canadiens media and fans, they can be very toxic, very hard environment for players and coaches and general managers to succeed if they're having a bad spell. The media, the fan base can um, can get on your back. Yeah, the football club doesn't have the same appeal as the Montreal Canadiens, and because it's you know the national sport and some of the best Canadian United players were French Canadian. It's the thing. Um, yeah, participation is one thing. It's quality participation and quality facilities. That's something else. And pathways and structures and funding, which is something we don't have for basketball in this country. Facilities aren't good enough. Funding isn't good enough. Pathways aren't good enough. And yes, we might have put the team together, for the London 2012 Olympics after we were awarded the 2012 Olympics. Doesn't mean we're any good. And it's not really a sport that is a major sport. It's a growing sport in the UK, and I can understand why. There's the demographic is youth demographics a bit more Americanized now than what it was when I was a kid. Um, but yeah, it's not. Um, it's boxing, so I'll give it a pass. Um, Completely tuned out of boxing in recent years. Doesn't have the appeal it did for me. Is AJ finished at Joshua? I've never seen in the last 10 years, at least, a boxer have his career mismanaged so horrendously. Um, I've seen boxers mismanage their careers, but never so horrendously. Um, that's on himself and his team. Some of the decisions that have been taken have been absolutely shocking. Um, and um, Absolutely shocking career management on all fronts on that one. Um, the end of an era, the era of the UK basketball was the 80s. Them before my time. Do you think people lie when they say they won't wear a Man United shirt for £1 million? I wouldn't. I have dignity. Although I am going to be wearing a Burnley shirt when I hit 2,000 subscribers, so anything's possible. Um, I am not a Manchester United fan. £1 million would be kind of nice, um, but uh, we'll see what happens. I wouldn't have thought we have enough quality for a separate nation, Chester. Burnley are walking the championship. Vincent Company, obviously, while he didn't do as well as Anderlecht as I think he would want, um, there are issues at Anderlecht, but they Burnley needed a manager quick. They got the manager, um, and he's doing a very good job at championship level. We'll see, uh, how he does in the Premier League, and we'll also with him, we'll also see how long Pep stays at Man City because I think there's a progression plan in place there. Um, we don't have enough good basketball players to have a competitive Great Britain team. No players in the NBA. Name me the most famous UK basketball. I can't think of one. Deng, 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 an American, Anglo-American. I think he's got residency rights here or something, or one of his parents was born here, but he played in the NBA for a brief period. I don't think he plays there now. Um, but no, I can't think of one. That's not to say there aren't British basketball players in the NCAA system who may get drafted by an NBA team. No, I didn't see the US versus GB women's. Nope. Oh, I did see the ice hockey score. Yes, like 21-0. But that was a university game. That was the university games. That wasn't the main national teams. Um, um, yeah, when someone goes on Love Island, I tune out completely. Again, who is advising these people? Women's World Cup in what sport? We're talking football, be England, US, or Canada. The Canadians, ironically, I think possibly have the best chance because actually they won Olympic gold. But no, as soon as an athlete of any kind signs up for Love Island, I have lost all respect. I think the Canadians actually could be the ones that really upset the apple cart um, and do it. Um, simply because I think the conditions, the weather conditions at the time of year, um, obviously they grow up in colder conditions. They did well at the Olympics and they won Olympic gold. The US didn't do so well. I think the Canadians could spring a surprise upon us all. It would be nice to see a new name on the trophy that isn't USA or Germany or Japan have won it, obviously, but isn't USA or Germany. Um, and the impetus I think that the women's game needs to shake things up. I think if England win it again, that's again an impetus that the game I think could use as we invented the bloody sport. Um, but I think the US have dominated just generically for too long. It's become damaging to the sport. I think, yeah, having a new nation put their name on the trophy will do wonders for the sport and growing it more globally and creating interest of a positive nature rather than what is Megan Rapinoe whinging about now kind of thing. Love Island isn't for either, but it makes him the most famous British basketball player because some women don't exist, which you can't be so. Was it England or the UK that invented football? The Football League is an English construct. The two oldest clubs are an English construct. The third oldest club is Welsh. I think the fourth oldest club is Queen's Park, I believe. I could be wrong on that. Basically, the oldest clubs in existence are English, Welsh, and Scottish. So let that sink in. Who would win right now? Bayern or Man United? I think that would be a draw. I think that would actually be a draw if both sides were to play right now. But again, that's a subjective viewpoint. Who would win right now? I think Bayern are looking more vulnerable than what they were. Yes. Australia will win the World Cup now. Bayern, I think, would win 1-0. Yeah, that's a good one. Chester Bayern will win on our main. I've just played a game. Basketball. Right. Okie dokie. I'm going to call that a stream. I just thought I would do a quick one in the evening. Obviously, I've got a 5-day weekend now, so I'm a little bit more relaxed in regards to getting content um, up on the channel and creating content for the channel. And so we'll have some interesting. I'll be looking at the NRL CBA negotiations. It looks more likely that the players will strike in the trials matches next week rather than the opening rounds of the regular season. So it looks like the All-Star match will not be affected, and we'll see what happens there. And also, I'll be doing maybe a few more sports history, like rugby league and club history videos for football in coming days, just because I can. I think Brighton Hove Albion is the next on my to-do list when it comes to football League and Premier League clubs. And rugby league, I'll be looking at Jamaica and South Africa. So there you go. Then Greece and Lebanon, and then we'll go through the Australia, New Zealand, etc. But anyway, thank you very much, and I will see you guys with some more content very, very soon.